I've been doing a bunch of tests on the iPhone 13 Pro cinematic mode to answer one question. Does it suck? What is going on, everyone? It is Finn Badgley, and yes, I did a bunch of tests with the iPhone 13 Pro's cinematic mode to see if it actually sucks or if this is a worthwhile tool that you can actually use as part of your content creation and filmmaking game.
Work hard, rest often.
I wanted this to be as comprehensive as a test as possible, so I did a bunch of stuff with actual shoots that I was doing, comparing the cinematic mode with it on and with it off, and some more everyday occurrences where you might just want to take a fun video down at the beach, as well as doing a little self-recording with it selfie style to see what the selfie camera is like in compared to the front-facing camera. Now, if you're not aware, the cinematic mode is this built-in AI technology similar to portrait mode. Essentially how this works is artificial intelligence isolates your subject from the background and gives you that ooey gooey bokeh that we all look for with professional high-end cameras, that nice shallow depth of field that you get with a very fast lens, something like f2.8, 1.4, 1.2, etc. Now, the thing is, because we're using AI here and not the optics in the lenses and the camera, does it give you the same look? Does it work? Well, that is why I tested this in a bunch of different scenarios, and I can say sometimes. There are situations in which it does, and there are situations in which it doesn't. And I tested this in a bunch of these different scenarios, so that way, if you watch till the end, you can get all the information to see if this is something you can use towards your filmmaking and content creation game, or if this is gonna be something you just leave turned off and is just one of those unnecessary features in technology. For some of these, like I mentioned earlier, I was on different shoots that I was on. You can see here when I had it off compared to when I had it on, there's actually a lot of nice background separation there. And the talent here is really nicely in focus, and that background is nicely blurred out. It actually gives it a lot higher end look than just the original one where everything's sharp and you can kind of tell more that it was filmed on a phone. Whereas the other one, it's a little harder to tell, and that background blur actually works really well. And there's some scenarios where this just crushes it. I even filmed a couple landscape shots down at the lake, and I thought this would confuse it more than it did. I find it works really well in natural, well-lit areas. Even if it's a bright sunny day and there's not a lot of clouds and there's some harsh shadows, it can still, with a decent amount of success, blur that out. And like you can see here with the lake, I thought the foreground would get all weird and maybe the background part of it would be out of focus and there would only be a weird bit in focus, but that wasn't really the case here, and it actually worked quite well. Now, in weird lighting situations, this is where I found it struggled the most. This can be in low light, this can be in really low light with really bright light, like if you're standing right close to a window and the light's hitting it from a certain direction, it can get a little weirder. And sometimes I also noticed there would be something on the same focal plane. So say if my hand is on the same focal plane as my face might be in focus, but my hand will be blurred out, even though based on how we view images and have seen things, we know that this is on the same roughly focal plane. And if my whole shirt's in focus and this is as blurry as a light back here, it just doesn't quite work as well. In fact, to give you a demonstration, I'm actually using the cinematic mode on this right now, and actually, okay, it keeps my hand pretty well in focus with my face, and this is a very well lit scenario. If I start like spinning around a little bit, you can see some lights there. It's actually not doing too bad. Let's see if I go closer, get the camera in there. Okay, it's struggling a little bit. What if I put it in front of my face? Okay. That actually worked surprisingly well. For some of these other situations though, where it was more of a low light scenario, it struggled a little bit more, especially in these challenging lighting scenarios, and sometimes it can have a harder time tracking onto faces if you're wearing sunglasses or different things like that. But I found in well-lit scenarios, like if you properly had a well-lit set and used this, you could get some pretty solid results out of it. Or if you're using a lot of natural light, it'll be great. If you want to do some more cinematic shots in low light or in weird situations, for example, I found this doesn't really like glass all that much, and it doesn't like cars or like a lot of objects going on and interacting in different ways. Like if you were inside of a car, you might get weird bits that are out of focus and weird bits that are in focus, kind of close to your head, something like that. It struggled with. Same as if you have a clear glass surface, it's going to get pretty confused. Whereas something like a professional camera, the optics account for all of that. So the glass will be in focus, but what's behind it won't be. Whereas this, if you're passing through a glass or something like that, it definitely struggles more. Something else to note with the cinematic mode on the iPhone is even if you have one of the Pro versions with the multiple cameras and lenses in there, cinematic mode currently only works on that standard 1x lens, whereas portrait mode works on the 3x telephoto lens. Cinematic mode only works for the wider shots. Now also where I noticed this, you couldn't tell as much of the result, is if you have a really wide shot, you're not going to see that depth of field as much because you're getting so much information in the frame. It's a little trickier for it to know where to blur, especially because it would have to be a lot more subtle than if you're closer up to something. That's one time where it might not even be worth it to give it a go, because you're not really going to notice the difference anyway. I also did notice in cinematic mode there's a bit of a color shift that takes away a bit of that kind of phone look of it, which is super helpful, and I think they just did that to kind of mirror a lot of these cinema cameras a little bit more, give it more of that look without actually you needing to do the work in color grading, etc. to get that look. So if you're using this for TikToks, Instagram Reels, all that sort of stuff, and a little bit of phone filmmaking, then it's a great way to also avoid color grading if that isn't your jam. I also found in certain scenarios, even in natural light, if you're heavily backlit and you get those weird hairs along the edges there, it has a little bit more of a struggle with the blur there. And that's really where on portraits you're going to notice this, and it always has been. If you have little flyaways and stuff, that's where you're going to notice the most amount of difference there. Whereas on a regular camera, it would take care of it more naturally. It's better than it was when like portrait mode first came out, but it's not quite there yet, and you still get a bit of that weird kind of haloing effect. And also I find the more movement you have in a shot, the more likely it is to fall apart a little bit or slip up. And that makes sense, because rather than accounting for a similar set of frames, it's accounting for a whole bunch of different frames at the same time. Like right now I'm trying to push this thing by swiveling around a bunch to see if it can keep up. And so far it's actually doing a solid job. It kept me in focus pretty much all of that. When it went forward and put the camera in frame, it didn't really lose it, and it didn't go all weird, which was very impressive to see there. So nicely done. That was funny. And for a lot of these shots, I wanted to really push this camera because I know from experience with portrait mode and seeing a little bit other information on the cinematic mode and just AI focus technology in general, that these are some of the areas where it would struggle. And so I really wanted to push this, really give you some real use case scenarios of when you'd be using this, what you'd kind of be doing, and how this performs when it's pushed like that. So testing it in low light, testing it with a bunch of different camera moves because it has more information to analyze. Testing it with incorporating elements into the foreground to see if that makes it lose it. Doing a whole bunch of different lit scenarios just to see where it does and where it doesn't perform the best. So with all that information, I hope that you gained a lot of value out of this and have a little more insight on when and when not to use iPhone's cinematic mode. Drop a like if you like this kind of thing, and let me know your thoughts. Have you used cinematic mode? Would you use it based on the information? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell for all future videos. Work hard, rest often, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.